Welcome to the France 24 debate. Tonight we focus on the race for the White House. Trump and Biden have been making the most of the final hours of campaigning. This is arguably the most important US election in living memory. The stakes are high for both candidates, for both political parties, and indeed for the United States, perhaps in their most disunited state since, some people say, since the Civil War. Let's hear how both candidates have been rallying their supporters.
I think it's a terrible thing when ballots can be collected after an election. I think it's a terrible thing when people or states are allowed to tabulate ballots for a long period of time after the election is over, because it can only lead to one thing, and that's very bad. You know what that thing is. I think it's a very dangerous, terrible thing. And I think it's terrible when we can't know the results of an election the night of the election in a modern-day age of computer.
The American people will not be silenced. Over 90 million people have already voted. Already voted. They've had enough. They've had enough. There's too much on the line to sit it out.
Joe Biden, Donald Trump, much more to come from them and much more analysis to come. Let's go straight to Washington, D.C., where my friend Francois Picard has a guest to bring you some more insight. Francois, over to you.
Yeah, you heard Joe Biden there talk about 90 million early voters. Actually, that number a few hours ago was up more towards 95. That's 2/3 of all the people that voted back in 2016. We're in Washington, Mark, and gosh, it really is so different from what it was like 4 years ago. We're pleased to welcome Jessica Taylor, who is with the nonpartisan Cook Report. You monitor elections and analyze all the polling data. There's a building behind us that we're going to talk about in a moment, which is what you cover, Senate races, and especially is your remit. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
First, though, let's talk about this last day of campaigning. Does it feel like the calm before the storm?
It does. You know, for us that cover elections, the few days before an election day itself, you know, where people are voting. People have been voting, though, for months, though, so it's a little different this year. And I think we're all just, you know, waiting for the results at this point. But the sheer fact, as you mentioned, that we have seen just astounding turnout, and we expect turnout to be possibly 155 to 160 million, which would be the highest percentage of registered voter turnout that we've seen since 1900 in this country.
1900. And so the last day, they're focusing on these key races and both candidates in Pennsylvania. We heard Joe Biden there a minute ago. Is that really where the race is going to be decided?
Pennsylvania is actually what we see as the tipping point state, although we do rate it as lean Democrat, is leaning toward Biden. And in our ratings, we have the races leaning toward Biden. Trump has to keep states in his column that he won 4 years ago by, 8 and 9 points, like Iowa and Ohio and Georgia and Texas, that are now competitive. So he not only has to hold together, just re-win the states that he's very much in danger of losing, but states that are moving away from him, like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that he had very narrow surprising victories in 2016.
So from what you're saying, it's sounding clearly like Biden has the advantage. However, those who support Biden are also managing their expectations because they all remember how much they got it wrong 4 years ago.
There's definitely a PTSD element among Democrats because, they do remember that in 2016, all of the data showed that it should be going toward them. And we have a lot of people that say, well, the polls were wrong in 2016. What if they're wrong again? Well, if the polls were wrong by how much they were in 2016, Biden would still win based on our analysis. And also pollsters have really changed their methodology of how they survey, especially the upper Midwest, where there are white working class voters that were being undersampled. So we feel very confident that we are getting better polling, more accurate polling than we were 4 years ago.
Have you at the Cook Report done some some soul searching as to how you proceed in those 4 years?
We have really, because yeah, I mean, we, like many people, got it wrong in 2016. But again, I think that we're in regular contact with these pollsters. So, you know, we rely on their data, and I think that talking with them about their changing methodology. And also, you've seen a lot of states that have had demographic shifts, like Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, that Trump won before, but because there are more younger voters. And we've also seen, especially, I think the crux of this is going to be college-educated white women that the Republicans usually got and that Trump narrowly got too in 2016, but now that are moving fast away from him. We saw that in the 2018 midterms, and now we're seeing it again. And also, Trump is struggling with seniors. That is really surprising. That's a demographic that Republicans have won for decades now, really. And I think that is because of COVID and how he's handled it, that, you know, if they are the most vulnerable population, that it's a real question about do they want 4 more years.
So Joe Biden, the favorites to win, although we're being cautious, right? But nonetheless, if Joe Biden wins and the Republicans retain the Senate,
right,
then it's not going to be some great pendulum swing, is it?
Right. Well, so the House is here right behind us, this one right here, and we expect that to stay in Democratic hands. They flipped it 2 years ago. And in fact, we think that they will even add seats. So the Senate a little further back on that side. I do think that Democrats are slightly favored to win the Senate. They need 3 seats if Biden wins, and they're well within that range. But
well within the range?
So we rate 12 Republican-held seats as competitive versus just 2 for Democrats. And remember, these are seats that are up every 6 years. And so 6 years ago was when Republicans flipped the Senate. So they have more seats that they are defending. There are 23 Republican seats that they're defending to just 12 for Democrats. So Republicans are really more exposed. And since this is turning out to be a pretty bad election climate for them, they're in a tough spot. So we rate, as of now, I think that we can say that Democrats are at least likely to net 2, which would put them short of what they need. But they have 6 other toss-up seats that we have that if they just win one of those, it would put them in the majority.
One of those would put them in the majority. And just the question then becomes, you were saying earlier how the demographics have shifted. But nonetheless, what our team found on the road these last weeks is people seem a lot less, how do I say it, reserved. Those who support Trump, even among young voters, say it out loud, whereas before they were a little more discreet about it.
That's why you have some people that say, well, the polls aren't capturing this shy Trump voter. I've yet to really meet a shy Trump voter. They're very vocal about it, as you mentioned. They're waving flags. They're packing his rallies despite public health concerns. So, and he has a base. He does. But the problem for him is that base is about 42, maybe 43%, and he's done very little to try to grow it beyond that. And so that's what's damaging him, but it's also damaging Senate Republicans as well.
One final question. How do you think America is doing?
We are more divided than ever, and I think that's really sad. And that we have talk about, you know, that the president is trying to cast doubt on counting whether all ballots should be counted and downplaying that. And that's just very dangerous. So I think there's a lot of this rhetoric, and it's magnified by social media, certainly, that can undermine our democracy. And I think that you see this with voters. I think they just want I think a majority of voters just want things to kind of go back to normal.
Right. Many thanks, Jessica Taylor of the Cook Report. And take your vitamins. It's going to be a long
lots of coffee.
Well, it's going to be a long couple of days. Thanks so much. There you have it, Marco. And Jessica, as you heard there, saying how one of those big bellwether states is indeed Joe Biden's native Pennsylvania.
Indeed. Francois, thank you. Thank Jessica, too. Fantastic analysis from her. Back to Francois in a minute. Francois said it, Pennsylvania, considered to be the state where the fate of the election is in the balance. We heard Jessica Taylor tell Francois it's the tipping point state. Basically, whoever takes Pennsylvania will most likely end up being able to put their feet on the desk in the Oval Office. Pennsylvania, as Francois just said, Biden's home state. But that's no guarantee of success. In 2016, Pennsylvania, with its 20 Electoral College votes, backed Trump by 48.2%. How will it go this time? A report by Kerevan Gorgistani and Mathieu Mabin.
For 4 decades, historian Richard Burkert has been exploring the abandoned steel mills of Johnstown, a small Pennsylvania town that was once the country's biggest iron and steel producer.
We are in the center of what was the Cambria Iron Works, which started operations here in Johnstown in 1854. This place was a geological treasure trove. The hill behind us actually had 3 alternating layers of iron ore and coal. You had mines throughout that entire hillside. It was considered to be one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the entire United States.
During Johnstown's heyday, up to 18,000 people worked in these steel mills. Today, that number has dropped to a few hundred. With help from the city, Patrick Quinn is trying to keep the art of metalwork alive by using and making traditional tools.
Yep, one more. Okay. For us, it's about preservation and appreciation for the early days of steel production in Johnstown. I think most of Johnstown is proud of their heritage, but I don't think that they're necessarily occupying these old steel mill buildings with the thought of like historic preservation as much as job creation.
During the 20th century, Johnstown steel workers built railroad tracks that were exported around the world. The town's industrial might is long gone, but a new generation of businesses are turning to technology and reinventing themselves to remain competitive, like the Freidhoff family business.
We are selling physical cabinets cheaper today than we did 20 years ago. And the only way you can do that is technology. We have product in Saudi Arabia, Africa, Europe, from little old Johnstown.
Cost-cutting and innovation are at the heart of this family business.
All our projects, we'll run them through that first system, and it'll optimize all the panels and say, this is the best yield we'll get out of the material. So it really cuts down on waste and makes our shop more efficient the way it cuts it.
Despite efforts to reinvent the local industry, Johnstown is finding it hard to thrive again. Though the unemployment rate is almost on par with the national average, the median income remains well below both state and national thresholds.
Indeed, economic change will often dictate how people's votes will change too. Let's get more from the heart of this presidential battle. Let's go back to Washington, D.C. Francois Picot, joined by our correspondent Ketevan Gorgistani, fresh from her report in Pennsylvania. Over to you two.
All right, many thanks, Marco. And Ketevan, we saw in that report the economic roller coaster on which the United States has been since the start of the COVID pandemic and the promises of 2016, making it that it is an uphill battle for Donald Trump.
Yes, it is, and I think Pennsylvania is kind of representative of the uphill battle for Donald Trump in the rest of the United States. It's really just a question of the path to 270, and it looks like
270 electoral votes.
That's exactly the Electoral College vote. That's the threshold, basically, and it seems like if you look at the map and if you look at what states Donald Trump won, but the states where Joe Biden is now leading, basically there are more paths to 270 for Joe Biden than there are for Donald Trump. Donald Trump basically needs to hold on to all of those states that he won narrowly. I'm thinking about Michigan, I'm thinking about Wisconsin, and of course Pennsylvania. But for Joe Biden, even if he were to lose Pennsylvania, he could still have other different paths, whereas Donald Trump basically has these two mammoth states. There's Pennsylvania, but there's, of course, Florida. If he were to lose Florida, for example, which is always a toss-up, always very close, the path to 270 for Donald Trump without Florida is very, very slim and very close.
And how close is Florida?
Florida has been going back and forth basically over the past few weeks, few months. It's one poll puts Biden in front, one poll puts Donald Trump in front. And the question there is probably going to come down to a few key demographics. And I'm thinking of the seniors. The seniors, back in 2016, Donald Trump won the seniors by about 17% over Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden, in the latest poll that I saw probably about a week ago, had about a 7-point lead over Donald Trump. So even if the polls are a bit wrong by a few points, that's a
pretty big swing in a state like Florida that is usually decided by very few votes.
All right, Florida, one of those states where, Mark, we are expected to have Tuesday evening results. They're used to tabulating those early votes and the mail-in ballots. So we'll get the votes from then on Tuesday. For other states, like Pennsylvania, it's going to be a lot more complicated. Pennsylvania, one of those states where they're not even going to open those ballots until Election Day.
Yes, and there are actually a few counties where they're not going to open them until the day after, so the morning after. So they're not even going to start counting them. And the problem or the issue with Pennsylvania is that you have mass mail-in ballots that are going to come in. They won that Supreme Court battle with the Democrats, with the Republicans, where the Republicans were trying to prevent that extension of the deadline to receive and to count some of those mail-in ballots. So the thing to remember when you're looking at the results from Pennsylvania on election night is that you're going to get the counts of election day votes and early voting first, and then the mail-in ballots. And if the trend that we've seen in the past few weeks about the Democrats having a little bit of an edge in mail-in ballots as opposed to Republicans, that could mean that we see initially maybe a wave pointing towards Donald Trump, and maybe with the ballots, then a blue wave, a Democratic wave. And so the trick with Pennsylvania is going to be to not read too much into the first initial preliminary results that we get.
And one man who may be reading a lot into the preliminary results, especially if they're more favorable to him than what comes later, is the U.S. president himself, Mark Owen.
Indeed. Donald Trump, of course, having said already that this is set to be the most corrupt election ever, but one might think that he might change his mind if he wins it. I suppose it depends how the cookie crumbles on that one. Francois Kerevan, thank you for now very much indeed. That's it for this first half of our special France 24 debate examining the US presidential election. Stay with us, much more to come. Welcome back to part two of the France 24 debate. The race for the White House reaching its final hurdle. The challenger Joe Biden, very much seen as the political thoroughbred, in the lead, if we can believe the opinion polls we heard earlier in part one about how there should be a question mark on those at all times, especially when you consider what happened 4 years ago. President Donald Trump, once considered to be the outsider, he is far from out of it. Of course, in 2016, he campaigned as the political outsider. But how can he expect voters to buy that line again after his 4 years in charge, where he, his family and his acolytes have all profited? So it's a race to the finish. There's no room for an each-way bet. It's winner takes all. And of course, right in the thick of things, we have our very own Francois Picard and Kerevan Gorgistani standing there in Washington, D.C. Francois, over to you.
Yeah, it is winner takes all. And you mentioned the stakes being high, and Donald Trump who'll have a lot to answer for if he loses, what with those cases that are taking place, Kerevan, against him, the suits that have been launched, criminal probes, the impeachment hearings in that building behind us may be long over, but there could be a judicial reckoning if he loses. So, yeah, a lot of people are nervous because there's a personal and a political stake for the U.S. president. Will he accept the result? What kind of a transition if he loses? But that first question, will he accept the result? Really, I'm amazed at how nervous people are when we see, for instance, the stores being boarded up in a few blocks away from here in Washington, D.C.
Well, I think there's a mix of uncertainty because of what the president has been saying, and also the fact that if you think about what these businesses have been through in the past few months, I mean, there was coronavirus, they boarded up because they were closing down, and then you had the protests and the violence from the George Floyd killing, and so they feel like if there is any possibility of more violence, they want to be ready. So there's a sense of more preparation rather than a real dread of something happening, especially in Washington.
Are we doing too much? Are we like contributing by raising the anxiousness level, the media?
Well, it's hard to say that we're doing too much when you have the president who for months now has been questioning the integrity of the election. He started by saying that mail-in ballots would lead to mass fraud. And then he said, well, maybe I won't agree to a peaceful transition if there is a transition. Then now, recently, he's saying that he's going to call the result if he feels like he's winning, and he's not going to wait for the official result. So he has fed also himself this sense of uncertainty on both sides with, the Democrats might be saying, well, we don't agree, we don't trust what you're saying. And then the Republicans are going to say, we don't trust these results because our president is saying that he won. So this whole atmosphere is insisting and creating this uncertainty.
Mark, you can't see it in the frame, but behind us is the Capitol, and when I look over Kedivon's shoulder that way is the U.S. Supreme Court. And the question is, when I look at that building, I think of 2000 and that Florida election that decided it, and a 5-4 partisan ruling. 3 of the judges now on the high bench were working for the Republicans in the lawsuit where effectively the high court refused a recount in Florida, and you feel as though there is this ginormous power play on. It's not clear what's going to happen.
Well, the president said it when he nominated Amy Coney Barrett. He said the reason why he wanted to be done before Election Day is because he wanted a court that had 9 justices to be able to rule in case there is a challenge to the election. So he made it clear that this is something that he's planning on, or at least preparing for. And then you've seen also both campaigns saying our lawyers are ready. They're ready to go. If we need to challenge, we will challenge. Both sides are ready. They've learned their mistakes from Florida. The one mistake being, do not concede until it's clear that you've lost. I'm thinking of Al Gore, of course, because then you look like you're the sore loser and you're overturning what you just said.
Yeah,
so,
he conceded, then he retracted
exactly.
the concession. What's the latest on that? Because we know there are lots of legal suits that are taking place parallel to people on this final day of early voting, casting ballots, legal suits in places like Pennsylvania and Texas.
Well, you've seen very different rulings from sometimes the Supreme Court, sometimes federal courts. You saw, for example, in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, the Supreme Court agreed to hold the extension of the deadline for receiving and counting those mail-in ballots. In Texas, there was this lawsuit by Republicans to try to throw out about 120,000 votes because they were done through drive-through voting. And the judge there, the Supreme Court of Texas, initially said, it's fine, they stand. Then the Republicans went back to the federal court saying, you need to prove that there is really something nefarious happening there for me to rule on that. So we'll have to keep an eye on that.
So a minor win for the Democrats for now.
For now. But there are states where it wasn't a win. In Wisconsin, it wasn't a win for the Democrats because there they prevented the extension.
All right. Part 1 of our discussion, Jessica Taylor said caffeine was her poison of choice. How are you going to get through the next 48, 72 hours?
Oh, I'm going to go with the caffeine all the way.
All right, there you have it, Mark Owen.
Caffeine all the way. As ever, the wise words of Kedivan Gorgeous-Stadi. Thank you both very much indeed. It looks cold out there, but you're looking great, the pair of you. All set, of course, for a marathon night of reporting. Francois and Kedivan there in Washington, D.C. Our analysis, of course, on this final day of campaigning for the U.S. presidential election continues. Our next guest joining us from Texas, Jacob Gursky, Research Associate at the Center for Media Engagement at the University of Texas. Jacob, thank you very much for being with us, sir. Great to see you. Given where you are geographically, Texas, give us a bit about the tale of Texas in this election, of course. It's a place that the Democrats are trying to flip. I understand that Kamala Harris has been there.
Yeah, everyone's sort of in that tense moment where they're trying to figure out which way it's going to flip. Nobody's really sure. I'm actually in Pennsylvania right now, and ended up I voted absentee in Texas. So I really like the piece you just did about Pennsylvania. I'm really close to Johnstown, actually.
Well, maybe we could talk about that too. One more question about Texas, though. I mean, you mentioned the tension about whether it will flip or not. What do you think will be the key thing in Texas before we come back to talk about Johnstown?
I think the key thing is just the enormous turnout that's already happened. I mean, you already have more people who voted in Texas now before the election day than voted in total in 2016. So I think everybody's just dealing with so many unprecedented things at the same time that everyone's on the edge of their seat.
It's a massive thing, isn't it, to consider, Jacob, that some 46% of people of the total electorate in the US didn't bother voting last time round. What are the key things you think that have made people clearly change their mind this time?
Part of it is the inundation with information that everyone has constantly, sort of the feeling that there's no escaping politics in every aspect of your life, that when you open your phone or you look on the computer or you go to work, there's just constant messaging. And I think people are happy that they're able to give something back after sort of getting so much messaging. Is finally time for agency. And I think people are really excited to have that opportunity, which is what democracy is all about, to get a little cheesy for a second.
Well, you get as cheesy as you like, sir, because I think many people agree with you, and I certainly do, that it's so important to vote. And if we go into, say, social media, I'm kind of struck by how many people are posting things like, don't forget to vote, I voted, have you voted, get out there and vote, have your say. Do you think that this time round social media, for better or for worse, has had a major effect on what is going to happen next?
For sure. So we've been conducting interviews with people who produce political messaging on social media for about the last, since January, since right before the pandemic really started. And because people are online so much and aren't able to turn away from the computers, the messaging they're seeing through these really intimate channels is incredibly important, because a lot of the messaging that people are seeing is actually politically motivated and comes from politicians, but is reaching them through their friends and families and neighbors in these sort of ways that are non-obvious. So yes, I think social media is a key part of the election this year.
And TikTok, something that Donald Trump was talking about closing down, that too has played, as I understand it, and just browsing through it, sort of you type in hashtag Trump, hashtag Biden, you find out there are various, I think it's called hot houses, you'll know this better than I will, which basically are dealing with pushing the message, presumably to the younger voter, the first-time voter.
Yeah, I think the key thing to understand about those hype houses is that the norms have shifted, especially on influencer platforms like TikTok and Instagram, which kind of go back and forth in terms of the similar types of influence. And where before, if you became political on these platforms, people would kind of shy away from you, especially on Instagram. But now the expectation is there. And on TikTok, people are organizing in these huge hype houses with hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And they have these tiered influencer structures with the goal of creating messaging to reach people at the right time, with the right message, with the right messenger, which is a piece of this puzzle that is unique to sort of the latest election cycles, as political actors have gotten better at leveraging social media.
I'm wondering where this fits into, and I'm getting you back to what you wanted to speak about a little earlier, Johnstown, and the effect of things there, and the images of decline we've seen there, but also the signs of green roots of recovery happening there. How does this new world fit in with that aspect of politics, do you think?
Yeah, I think that it sort of, this is kind of a cliche at this point, but it lets people surround themselves with people who just agree with them, which is the cliched part. But the part that is innovative in this is the ability for campaigns to identify people in areas like Johnstown, which may have felt a little bit ignored in past election cycles, and find people who are politically active in those spaces and get them to spread messages in those communities. Because in a tight-knit community, if you can get somebody who's important in that community to talk on your behalf, it's a lot more powerful sometimes than just having a generic political message coming from somebody who feels out of touch with where you are.
And seeing those images from Johnstown, I suspect it hasn't changed that much since 2016 when the state went to Trump. Is there a sense, do you think, or certainly there was a sense then, that they felt disconnected from politics? Has that changed in some way, do you think, now?
Yeah, I think people definitely have a lot of agency. And I'm not in Johnstown, I'm in a similar town nearby, and frankly, it's as divided as everywhere else in the United States. But the leveling sort of the playing field from social media is a real thing. Right now, I feel like it's sort of tilted towards people who have these mass networks of influence that they're able to leverage, especially politicians with influencer networks or mass ad campaigns. But I think and this is anecdotal, but I think there is definitely a sense of more agency coming through your phone into the rest of the world, or as it reaches you.
So you're finding out things quicker, you're able to react quicker, you're able perhaps to absorb. Do you think maybe there's a lack of analysis that comes with that?
Yes, for sure. And a lot of the times it's in a predatory sense. One of the key things that we've looked at in our research is, messaging source and tracking the people who create messages up to the point where it reaches where people actually see it. And a lot of the times the messaging that you see, people have no idea where it originally came from. And that's by design. And in platforms like TikTok or Instagram or Telegram, there's a lot of grams in this space, but there's sort of an inverted pyramid shape where you have these highly organized content creators at the bottom who create messaging with the goal of it either being deceptive or people not knowing the true origin or double meaning of what they're spreading, so that by the time it reaches people whose interaction with the internet is on the level of Facebook or Twitter, or seeing Facebook and Twitter posts reported on by the mainstream media, they don't know where that original source came from. And TikTok is a big part of that, because for younger voters in more isolated places, because it gives them a sense of agency, but they're not necessarily taught how to separate not just the true origin of the messages that they're seeing, but the true motivations of the people trying to get them to spread messages.
It's a sense of smoke and mirrors, isn't it? I mean, such as the video which has just been exposed of Joe Biden, apparently forgetting where he is, but it's apparently completely concocted to make it look like he's somewhere where he wasn't.
Yeah, it's sort of this erosion of truth, and it's this feeling that even if you don't believe the lies, it's equally important. It's equally important, and the goal of the people creating this message is that you don't know where to find the truth. So if you can sort of just inundate the internet and the spaces where people are finding their information with this sort of smoke and mirrors and just a gas, people don't know where to find the truth, and then people who are telling lies are able to find that gray area.
Indeed, and that grey area is where people get exploited and where votes get contorted, I suppose. Jacob, bear with us, please, sir. I'm going to pop back to Francois Picard, who is in Washington, D.C., braving the cold, for more political insight. Francois, over to you.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear Jacob there talk about the erosion of truth. And we were at a voting station in the suburbs of Washington, in Maryland. And we asked the spokesperson for the county's Board of Elections there if he had faith in the system. He said yes. He said that the fact that there is this surge of early voting and perhaps a record turnout gives him faith that that citizens will keep their eye on the ball and control the what happens especially after 8 p.m. there when the polls close on Tuesday. It was a contrasting message from what we've seen with some of the activists that are daily near the White House with those Black Lives Matter signs near the area that's barricaded near the White House. When they saw we had the mic flag from French television, from France 24, saying to us, thank you for coming, tell the truth, as if the United States democracy was in jeopardy. And it's interesting to note that contrast that we have seen between those who do have faith in the system, that these 240-year-old institutions here can weather whatever comes, and those who seriously have doubts.
Is this, Francois, a problem, do you think, with American media? Because you get the messages, I get the messages from our viewers in the United States who thank us for having a particular, how can I put it, straight down the line view of current affairs and the news and the way we report it, whereas they say in the US it gets distorted.
I think maybe Jacob can answer this better than me, that there's the idea of tribalism that always existed, right? I mean, when you were little, you had your favorite television channels and your most trusted sources of information. But it is true that nowadays, in this election in particular, what we've seen is that the two sides are really at loggerheads and not speaking to each other. Finding common ground is what's going to be difficult, whoever wins.
Indeed, it's been a massive change in US politics. Francois, you're in the middle of it all there. Thank you very much indeed, Francois Picard, all set for a marathon session of reporting, reacting and analysing throughout this US presidential voting day. Francois, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to, as Francois recommended, Jacob Gursky, the research associate at the Center for Media Engagement at the University of Texas. Jacob joining us from Pennsylvania. Great to see you, sir. Can I put that question to you then about the trust that American citizens have in their media, in the reporting of what's going on, and how perhaps that has broken down of late? Do you think that's the case?
I think it ties back to social media and how there are so many different sources where you can get your information, and everyone can kind of choose where they want to see it. And your universe starts to feel like a completely separate universe from your neighbors. This is an anecdotal story, but my sister told me about a friend of hers who has a Facebook account where she just posts about roasting marshmallows. And then my sister went to her friend's actual Facebook account, and it was a bunch of political things that my friend she personally did not agree with. But she was never exposed to that. She was exclusively exposed to what Facebook had wanted her to see. And when your personal relationship with the news becomes that intimate and hyper-targeted, your relationship with the higher level news, it becomes much higher level news being legacy news platforms, becomes sort of more easily manipulatable and harder to see where the truth is coming from when the mainstream messages are running counter to the messages that the people who are most important to in your life are sending you.
So once that doubt has been sown in the voter's mind, that can be manipulated in a sense by any other platform that comes via the internet platforms, the social networks, those kind of systems. Even though perhaps somewhere in their mind they may have these trusted sources, you say that's all been broken down now?
Yeah, and many others have been inserted. So maybe in addition to the legacy platforms, you have your TikTok influencers that you follow, and your Instagram influencers, and your Telegram channels. And it's just this inundation that creates a sense of confusion that puts truth in a position of vulnerability. And part of this is also that, I mean, this is also sort of a cliche at this point, but that these social media platforms rely on people getting angry and rely on things that go viral. And the things that go viral are sometimes mutually exclusive from things that are true, to put it frankly. And it puts people in a state of confusion, which is a state of vulnerability.
Indeed, things that go viral sometimes are at odds with things that are actually true. I think that's an extremely true phrase, Jacob. In terms of the media, in terms of managing the media, one would imagine that Trump is far better at this than Biden.
I think a good demonstration of this, of at least the different strategies, is if you look at their campaign apps. And this goes back to what I was talking about different sources of information. So both of their campaign apps in the United States have a sort of a news feed. Biden's mostly just tells you where you can find rallies and things, but Trump's is actually a hand-selected Twitter feed with only accounts that they want you to see. And there's also an ongoing feed of articles that sometimes have no listed author and disappear when they're gone. So, and that makes it, when you're having a conversation with somebody who's getting their news directed at them straight from a politician, whether it's Biden or Trump, from this closed system that is ultimately inaudible to fact checkers, third-party, nonpartisan fact checkers, it contributes to this sort of gradual edging between you and your neighbors, where you just talk to each other and you feel like there's no common ground. And it kind of just puts people in a position where they're not sure what to do.
I'm watching your facial expression, and it is dropping as you are telling us this, Jacob. And I was about to ask you, this is creating a kind of separate individual bubble scenario where people are living in their own little protective bubble, editorially speaking, or in any aspect of their lives, I suppose, and creating more division within society, the division that we're seeing across the United States today.
Yeah, and I think the thing about those bubbles is that they're meant to feel naturalistic, but a lot of times they're very invented. This is extremely clear. This is very well demonstrated in the rise of conspiracy theories in the United States. Again, anecdotal, but in my hometown, there's a van that says that has conspiracy theory logos on the back and hashtags. I'm not going to say what they are. I don't want to drop those things, but And that sort of movement of these extreme ideas into mainstream conversation is very much by design and through these platforms. And it's when you tell somebody the truth, it can make them feel like you're talking down to them, or that you're saying you're not intelligent enough to understand this, which is not what it is. But when you set this sort of breadcrumbs of lies that lead to these ridiculous conclusions with a conspiracy theory, it gives people a sense of agency, which is something people really want when they have the sense of confusion that we talked about earlier with the complete inundation of information from different places. So,
Indeed, it is a masterstroke of bringing people inside into this to make them feel they're complicit and part of it all, to make them feel that they're in the know as well. That's what it's about, isn't it?
Yes, it's sort of that's when you put people in that position of vulnerability where they're not sure what the truth is or they don't trust anybody, then when they approach things with their own agency, there are levers that social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and just general targeted advertising has created these levers of power that allow people with political agendas to take people who are confused or looking for the truth and bring them into belief systems they never would have had otherwise.
Jacob Gursky, thank you very much indeed for that analysis. Jacob Gursky, Research Associate at the Center for Media Management at the University of Texas, joining us from Pennsylvania. Thank you, sir, for sharing that with us and sharing your time with us mostly. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, of course, to my friend Francois Picard, who is still at Washington, D.C. Francois, a final word from you. Short one, please.
Yeah. A short one is that, first of all, rebounding off of what Jacob just said, this could be the last of these kinds of elections because there's the feeling that there is a reckoning, both in Congress and with the Supreme Court, that the rules do have to be changed when it comes to how campaigning gets broadcast over social media. More broadly, Mark, the election coverage is just beginning on France 24. How you stage that election during a pandemic, how you count the votes with all the uncertainty we've talked about during this hour, we'll be talking about in a special edition on Tuesday of the France 24 debate.
Francois, thank you very much indeed. The rules here remain the same, reporting straight down the line. Stay with us. You're watching France 24.